We typically have these meetings in April and May. We were pushing this one off until we got all the guidelines from the state, but we didn't get the COVID guidelines yet. So once we get that, we're going to send that to you. So in the meantime, we did get the pesticide legislation guidelines. We're going to cover that at this meeting. And also the state said if we were going to have a camp directors meeting, they felt that we should cover some things about the buddy system and the playground safety. So we'll be covering that at this meeting. All right. So if you could go to the next slide. Chris Candell is going to also moderating this and recording this, and he's going to be talking about the buddy system. He's one of the supervisors for the children's camps, and he's a resource that you can use too, besides me. All right, so the COVID guidance from the states hasn't been released yet, but that guidance is going to be recommendations or best practices. So when you get that, it states it's the guidelines on how to be as safe as possible. But in the meantime, New York State did issue some new revised isolation and quarantine guidance dated May 31st, 2022. I have links to that. That is what we expect you to follow if there's any incident where you need isolation or quarantining. We want you to follow those guidelines for your camp. So you can download those documents and review them. If you have any questions, you can send them to Chris or I in the future. Next slide. But with all injuries and illnesses, including COVID illnesses to your staff and campers, we require you to submit an illness report to us. You can scan it or fax it. It's a standard illness report, but we do expect that sent to us within 24 hours, so then we can review and then give you any additional guidance if you need that with any injury or illnesses. So again, with the COVID guidelines, once we get that, I'll send out emails, and then we'll give you some guidance with that. The next slide is we're going to go over the pesticide legislation, and that's Scott Campbell. So next slide.
So just before I move ahead, I just want to say I'm going to post those links in our chat. So if anyone wants to follow those links for the isolation quarantine guidance, it's in the chat for you guys.
Hello, everybody. As it says, I'm Scott Campbell. I'm the laboratory chief for the Arthropod-Borne Disease Laboratory, and we'll be discussing the new pesticide legislation that is going to be enacted this month. Next. So it will become effective the 20th of June of this year. It applies only when camp is in session. And this law, it actually prohibits the application of pesticides to any playground, turf, athletic, or playing field at a children's camp. There are some exceptions, which we will discuss at this time. The law allows the children camps to apply an emergency application of a pesticide to the playgrounds, turf, or athletic or playing fields to address public health or environmental emergency, and we'll discuss what these emergencies qualify to be. You should have all received a fact sheet from us, and if you haven't, please let us know. But it's all outlined in that fact sheet. Next. So what is a pesticide? A pesticide is any substance or mixture of substances that targets pests or vegetation. It's pretty simple, and I think most of us have an idea of what pesticides actually are, but it's really anything that's applied to target pests or vegetation. Next. So all pesticide applications at children camps must be done by a DEC certified pesticide applicator or technician. The pesticide applicator must adhere to the neighbor notification law. There are some exemptions for notification, this law, neighbor notification law, and the applicator will know when the exemption applies and no notification is required. Any necessary pesticide application to playground, to the turf, athletic, or playing field should be done at least 30 days prior to the camp start to avoid implication of this new law. Next. So the application of antimicrobial pesticides is an exemption to this law, and the antimicrobial pesticide is basically what it sounds to be. It's intended to disinfect, sanitize, reduce, or mitigate growth of bacteria, viruses, fungi, protozoa, algae, or slime. So basically it's cleaning products or something along those lines. They are exempt and they can be applied to those areas. Aerosol products are also exempt, and it's in containers of 18 fluid ounces or less, and it's directed spray and targeting biting insects and stinging insects, including spiders, bees, wasps, and hornets. Also, an exemption includes non-volatile insect or rodent baits in tamper-resistant containers, as well as EPA registered exempt materials under that law. And some of the examples are pheromone traps, cedar oil, citronella oil, spearmint oil. There are dozens of exempt products, and they are exempt. Boric acid and disodium octaborate tetrahydrate are also exempt, as well as horticultural soaps and oils, as long as they don't contain any synthetic pesticides or synergists. Next. Acceptable applications. So non-exempt pesticides can be applied in areas that are inaccessible to campers. So these are areas around the types of areas, the playgrounds and playing fields that we discussed, but they have to be unacceptable by the campers. So they have to be fenced or some barrier to prevent the campers from gaining access to those areas. Also, an acceptable use is along the trails between the fields there, because they don't qualify as those restricted areas. They can be sprayed as well. Any pesticide, when it is sprayed, regardless of the location, drift or overspray or runoff has to be controlled. So that's also applicable here. Next, the use of non-exempt prohibited pesticide is warranted and would be used specifically to reduce the threat in safety and health of children and adults when present. So this is how you would request a non-exempt prohibited pesticide to spray while the camp is in session. An example would be a non-exempt pesticide for the control of ticks, which obviously can carry human pathogens, or mosquitoes that can carry human pathogens. And it also includes anything that may arise in the future. And the example here is fire ant colonies. We don't have them in New York currently, but should they ever become established here, or another insect or arthropod that would affect the possible public health of the group, it would be a way to request for a non-exempt prohibited pesticide. To do that, you would contact Public Health Protection at this number, 631-852-5900, or email us at healthphp@suffolkcountynY.gov, which was also, I think, on like the second slide. So that's the way you would request a non-exempt prohibited pesticide to be applied in an emergency situation regarding public health. Next. So examples of non-warrant use. So these are situations where they don't qualify for an exemption. So it would be the ability to use an alternative pest management method, like removing poison ivy by pulling, let's say. So if an alternative is available, that's the best option, and an exemption would not be approved. Anything that's a routine pest problem, repetitive pest problem, that would be something that wouldn't qualify. You anticipate it, it's going to happen, and so that would not qualify. Anything for aesthetic reasons, an application for aesthetic reasons to make the turf look better, that would not qualify as well. And any impact to improve the quality of the turf, like to improve bare patches or ruts, that would not qualify as well. So those are some instances where you would not be able to apply for an exemption for a non-exempt product. Next. So that's it. I didn't know if we were going to take questions about the pesticide law now.
Yeah, we might as well. If anyone has any COVID questions or playground questions, if you want to either unmute yourself and ask, or if you want to enter it in the chat, feel free.
Yeah, I have a question. Bob at Park Shore. So if I'm hearing you correctly, your weed killer cannot be used on a ball field or a playground for aesthetic purposes, and more importantly, to kill poison ivy.
Correct. It can not be used while the camp is in session. It can be used prior to when the camp is in session. 30 days is a recommendation, but it can't be used when the camp is in session.
We start June 27th. Oh boy, we noticed that there's some poison ivy that was missed. I'd like to do it tomorrow, theoretically. Can that be done? It's not 30 days.
Currently, the law is not in effect until the 20th of June.
So you can do it.
Believe me, I'm reading between the lines. I thank you. So just out of curiosity, why was this law passed?
There's a very similar law with regards to pesticide application in those environments, those locations in schools. So it's basically just moving that law and basically protecting children against exposure to chemicals in the camp situation.
Understood.
So next year, obviously, you would want to plan to spray for poison ivy.
Oh, yeah.
Anything 30 days prior. But as I said, the law becomes in effect on 20th of June.
No problem. Thank you.
You're welcome.
While I have everyone there from the Board of Health, I kind of represent LICAPS right now, Long Island camps and private schools, and all the other camps that are on there. I just want to shout out to the health department for all your unbelievable help throughout this crisis starting in 2020. It was amazing how you guys and girls helped us through this terrible time. So we want to thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you. We appreciate that.
Yeah, appreciate it. Thank you, Bob.
No, I with all sincerity, Mark Transport and everybody at LICAPS, this has been said many times, and it really, you went way overboard, and we all did it great together as a team, and thank you kindly.
And Jeff, we do have a question in the chat here regarding the COVID information, whether or not that camps would fall under the school and childcare exceptions regarding close contacts, being required to quarantine if not vaccinated.
Yeah, that question we're gonna have to get back to them to answer that.
Yeah, a lot of that can be found on the, sorry, we don't have an answer for you just a second, but a lot of that can be found on those links. But we can clarify that when we send out the slides after the presentation.
Okay, let's move to the next segment.
Okay, I just want to make sure everybody can hear me because I'm using earbuds.
Yes,
Guys hear me?
yes, Christine.
All good? Okay. Hello, everybody. I saw a couple of familiar faces out there. I'm Christine Bouchard. I was a camp inspector for a few years, currently being pulled away to do some other things, and I was promoted. So I won't be coming out to your camps this year for you, but if you have my number and you want to ask me a question, feel free. And if I don't have the answer, I'll forward you to your camp inspector. I'm just going to go over a few things about playgrounds. We got some, the state wanted us to go over some things regarding the safety. So if we go next slide. So with regard to playground injuries, it's estimated that there are about 200,000 injuries annually from public playgrounds that require emergency room treatment. And 79% of those are resulting from falls from equipment. So we're just going to talk a little bit about what we can do to prevent that. Next slide. So with regard to concussions, if you just advance once, you can see right there at the top there, playground equipment activity is about 2 to 3% are concussions. And, if you look at all the rest, no, don't go. Something like field sports or organized games, you're up there between 15 and over 20%. But concussions are a little bit on the low side, but if we go to the next slide, you can see fractures much higher. Next, advance. So we're about 13%, which is just below like the organized games, field sports. If you look up at like further up eating, we're still at like 3% for eating. So I guess, I don't know, that's walking with your tray to your table. I'm not sure how they're getting hurt eating, but these kids doing chores is even on the list. But playground equipment is at 13%. That's pretty high for fractures. So if we go next slide. So the state has created, and this has been around for a while, but it's the Public Playground Safety Handbook. The U.S. Consumer Product Safety Commissions has developed this handbook to guide you guys to either maintain your current playground, or if you're thinking of adding a playground, it'll give you everything you need to know to do that safely. Next slide. So the handbook will provide the standards and some technical information regarding design and the layout, and also maintenance in order to minimize the injuries that we're seeing. So that's a link right there. If you guys, I don't know if you guys, want to just write that down, we could always forward that off to you if you need that. But that's the link to get to the handbook. We could always go back to that. We could put that into the chat maybe as a link. Next slide. One of the things they wanted us to go over is supervision, because not all playground equipment is appropriate for all children, and that's basically based on age and their abilities. So toddlers and preschool age children, they might require more supervision, but supervision alone isn't going to prevent all injuries. Next slide. So this is an example, and this is right out of the handbook, on what kinds of things you want to have on your playground based on the age of the camper using the equipment. So as you can see, as they get older, they can do more and more things, but that's if you want to just look at that to determine, all right, is this playground that we have going to be appropriate for the campers that we have, or is the playground that we're thinking of putting in going to be appropriate for the people using? Okay, next slide. So just going over the basics of some playground safety. These are some of the things that, we'll look for when we do our pre-inspections and our regular inspections. You want to check for broken equipment. If it is broken, you want to rope it off, get it fixed as soon as possible. Checking for, unsafe modifications, making sure children that are using the playground are wearing sneakers or some kind of footwear. And just with regard to supervision, you want to stop dangerous horseplay and children maybe throwing materials that are from the ground or jumping from high heights. And you want to check for your properly maintained protective surfacing. So surfacing is a big thing with injuries. Next slide. So this is, and it's a little hard to see, but I don't know if everyone can see the bottom, but anyway, this is a difference between appropriate surfacing and inappropriate surfacing. You can use things like sand, pea gravel, shredded rubber mulch, wood mulch. The wood mulch can't be CCA treated. If anyone's wondering what that means that it's chromated copper arsenate. So it has chromium, copper, and arsenic in it. So if you get your wood mulch that from wood that's been like taken from like a construction site, it might have been pre-treated or with like that as a preservative in it. So you can't use mulch that has that in it. But so those things are all good if you have the non-CCA treated wood mulch, wood chips. You can't have asphalt, carpet, concrete, dirt, stuff like that. So when you're falling onto a surface like this, the surface plays a big part in whether or not you're going to get a serious head injury or how bad it's going to be. It's really important to check your surfacing. Next slide. This is a little chart showing how many inches. People don't realize exactly how many inches of the material is needed of each particular, each particular material is a certain amount of inches needed to protect from certain height of fall. So just pay attention to how much of the material you have on your surface. Next. Just some things to consider with loose fill materials. They will compress over time, at least 25%, because of use and weathering. They get wet. So they require frequent maintenance. If you're going to use a loose fill, you have to think about, all right, am I going to be able to maintain this over the course of the whole camp? The perimeter of the playground should also provide a method of containing the loose fill. So if you just throw a bunch of whatever it is, mulch, sand, gravel down, the kids are going to run on, it's going to spread out. You want to have a way to maintain it. I have a picture of that later. So, and also good drainage is good because you want to be able to let that dry out because it will maintain its thickness better. And again, the CCA treated stuff not allowed. Next slide. So this is kind of a good example of how they've maintained the fill with a border. Very clearly defined. You want it to be obvious and you want it to hold in whatever material you're using. Next slide. This is not a good example of some surfacing where it's become neglected and uneven and hard and it's just not good. Next slide. Next. So this is next. You'll see right here, they use concrete to hold in the bottom of the slide, but over time, the ground has worn away, whatever they were using, sand or mulch or whatever. And now they just got some concrete sticking out. Next dance. That happens a lot with swings, kids with their feet pushing all the material out from underneath where their feet are going to go. Next. And then in this one, it looks like they put that black perimeter around it. And I don't know if they were waiting for the fill or if they were just made a perimeter for the playground itself and then never intending to use fill. Looks like there might be some sand there, but then there's just dirt and that's not acceptable. Next. So next, we got an example here next of a slide that just lets you out right onto the dirt. Obviously not acceptable. Next. Another one here, just the hump, nothing protecting at the top, and also letting down right onto the dirt. Next, if you're going to have a slide, there has to be a certain pitch and some protective stuff at the top, directing people into a sitting position. And then when you come down to the bottom, it has to be horizontal and lifted up off the ground. And anyway, so there's lots of pictures in the handbook that will show you how to correctly choose and assemble your equipment or to reduce injuries. Next. There's also tripping hazards. So some people start to use these rubber mats, and then where they meet, they start pulling up, they get uneven, and they become a tripping hazard. So other common tripping hazards would be like anchoring devices, containment walls. So any change in the elevation should be visible and obvious. Go to next slide. You can see like a lot of people just use these railroad tie type of things. In that bottom right corner picture, you can see how the rubber mats kind of start to be uneven, and that could trip kids. So you want to be aware of tripping hazards as well for falls. Next. That's pretty much it. If you guys have any questions, we will try to answer them as best we can. Let's see. I'm going to take a look. I have been a playground.
On the phone,
If I can.
but I can't
Oh, okay.
get on the phone. Read this on the phone, but
Somebody's talking, but I don't know if that's anything to do with this.
I can hear. But I can't.
Okay.
On the phone. I just
All right.
leave it on the phone.
I don't see any questions. If you guys have any questions, you can either unmute yourself to ask them or type them into the chat. I have the chat open and I'll be happy to answer them if I can. If not, maybe Jeff or Chris can. It's pretty straightforward. I know a lot of you guys already have your playgrounds. So it's, if they're old, you want to take a look. I didn't get into any of the entrapment issues that happen at playgrounds with older equipment. That's a thing, but we weren't really focusing on that today because they just wanted to focus on falls and, you know, getting concussions or breaking bones. But entrapment is definitely an issue with older equipment, getting your head trapped between bars or things like that. Anything else?
No. Thank you.
Okay, all right.
All right, thanks, Christine. So I'm Chris Candell, one of the supervisors over here with the Children's Camp program. So I'm going to be discussing swim at camp, mainly focusing on the buddy system. First off are just some stats. I'm not going to spend too much time on this slide, but really just what we want to focus on is between 1987 and 2017, there have been some fatal drownings at children's camps. So again, not trying to focus too much on the stats or kind of extrapolate anything from this, but just to sort of indicate that fatal drownings have happened, and we want to do the best we can to prevent these. And the big part about that is focusing on the buddy check. As far as those fatal drownings go, the contributing factors were a few things. Pool bottom not being visible, pools that have a cloudy water, you couldn't see the bottom. So if the camper ends up on the bottom, if the pool is too cloudy, you wouldn't be able to see them. Poor lifeguard positioning. So if there was some sort of glare where the lifeguards were positioned, they weren't able to see to the bottom of the pool, or where they weren't able to see certain sections of the pool. Want to make sure that they're just moving around to avoid that glare. Counselors not actively supervising their campers. We talk about this a lot, and we want to make sure that during the swim, the counselors know that they still are responsible for supervising their campers. We don't want it to be a time for them to have a break. It shouldn't be, oh, the lifeguards are going to take care of all the kids, they're going to watch them. It is still the counselor's responsibility to supervise their campers. And then, of course, like I said, buddy board or buddy system deficiencies, such as non-swimmers being in an area that is greater than chest deep, not having an assigned buddy, no sort of visual identifier to determine who is a swimmer versus a non-swimmer, buddies not sticking together, or campers exiting the water and not being accounted for by the counselors. So as far as the swim at camp, you want to make sure that there are swim assessments. And this should be done if a camp is going to have some sort of differentiation between a swimmer and a non-swimmer. So if there is a camp or you are at a facility that is only going to have non-swimmers, you would not need the swim assessment. But for the vast majority of those who have a swim, you want to make sure that there is a swim assessment being conducted. This needs to be done by an approved progressive swim instructor. And we do have those fact sheets that we released to you. So you have the fact sheet. If you don't, we can always resend them, of all the approved progressive swim instructors. Needs to be conducted at least annually, but also periodically if needed. So if a camper was a non-swimmer, maybe they've built up their swimming strength throughout the season, they can be retested to see if they can become a swimmer. Or maybe you're going to a new facility, a place with a deeper pool, or maybe you're going to a beach instead of a pool. You may want to reassess at that point. Or maybe a camper had some sort of injury that was a swimmer, and maybe that injury is impacting them and they should be reclassified as a non-swimmer, but at least once annually. And then a camper, if you have a new camper coming in or swim hasn't started yet, all campers must be considered non-swimmers until they have been tested that year. So even if they were a swimmer last year, they need to be swim assessed before any sort of swim activity where they be considered a swimmer again. And each camp must have a minimum of 2 classifications. So that would be a non-swimmer and a swimmer, but you're welcome to have additional ones. Some camps will have a deep water swimmer where they'd be able to go in maybe a deeper pool or into a dive tank. If, like I said, if you're going to a beach, you could also then potentially have a classification for like a beach swimmer or something like that. There is no codified specification or criteria for swim assessments. It's all included in the safety plan. So everyone's safety plan, there will be an example, which I'll get to, of a potential assessment, but it can also be, or really should be, up to your progressive swim instructor what that criteria is. And when you do the swimming assessments, we want to make sure that they're starting in the shallow water and working their way to a deeper water. So this is the sample criteria in the safety plan. A lot of camps do go with the typical sample criteria or the criteria that's set by the safety plan to determine who can be a swimmer. So starting with the first entry into water greater than chest deep, completely submerging, treading water for 1 minute, maintaining position on their back for 1 minute, swimming 40 yards continuously using any stroke except for doggy paddling. So freestyle, backstroke, breaststroke, any other stroke, just not the dog paddle. Rotating 360 degrees in the water and orienting to the exit and exiting from the water. So this is just a sample criteria. If you wish to use this, feel free. If your progressive swim instructor would rather use their own criteria, that is absolutely okay, so long as it's addressed in the safety plan. So other suggestions would be the American Red Cross WSI level 4, or really any other specific levels within the progressive swim instructor. But if you are going to use something different, like I said, it should be addressed in the safety plan. Now, once you have your assessments and you have your non-swimmers versus your swimmers, non-swimmers must always be restricted to water that is less than chest deep. There are 2 exceptions though. One is during learn to swim programs. So if you do swim lessons at camp, during those swim lessons, when they are with their instructor, they are allowed to go in water that is less than or greater than chest deep. And also when counselors are in the water directly supervising non-swimmers. This isn't really recommended. It is something that you can do at your camp, but it's usually not recommended because it does allow up to 3 non-swimmers with 1 counselor, but sometimes that can just be too much for 1 counselor if they have 3 campers that really have poor swimming skills. And if they're moving into water that's less than chest deep, it can be a little bit tricky because you're depending on that 1 counselor potentially for 3 campers. Again, you can go this route, it's just not a strong recommendation. And the reason behind this water depth restriction is because bathers become buoyant in water that is greater than chest deep or at chest deep. And when that happens, they become buoyant, they can't touch the ground anymore, the bottom of the pool, and they can begin to drift and entering water that they are not able to stand in and potentially could result in some sort of drowning incident. And since 1988, all non-swimmer drownings were attributed to the non-swimmer being in water that was greater than chest deep. Now, when you're going on a camp trip or to do swimming activities, or let's say you don't have any on-site pool and you're only going to be swimming off-site, you still need that progressive swim instructor to conduct your swim assessments. So you don't necessarily need your own progressive swim instructor if you're going to be swimming strictly off-site. There are a couple options. You can use the facilities progressive swim instructor where you're going to, but you do want to make sure that you're arranging that in advance, reaching out to them, making sure that they have the proper certifications, and you really should also provide that to us, so we know that you have a certified progressive swim instructor to conduct these assessments. You can borrow the progressive swim instructor from another camp if needed. And like I said previously, if you are going to have only non-swimmers, or you're going to have or go to a trip where you're only going to be restricting your campers to water that is less than chest deep, there would be no requirement for a swim assessment. And I sort of discussed this previously also. If you're going to a facility, let's say you have some on-site swimming at your camp, but it's a small pool, maybe a shallow pool, and you're going off-site to a deeper pool, you're going to a surf beach maybe, you may want to then reassess the campers and make sure that they are going to be classified as swimmers or be able to be strong enough swimmers for that off-site facility. Swimming areas. When you do have your swimmers versus non-swimmers, you do want to designate specific areas for those non-swimmers. So basically designating areas that are no deeper than chest deep for your shortest non-swimmer. Natural bodies of water. So if you are at a beach, obviously there are going to be some depth fluctuations. So if you are going to a beach and you are going to have some non-swimmers there, you want to make sure that you're checking the area in advance, making sure that there aren't any large divots that a non-swimmer can then potentially be submerged or be in water that's now greater than chest deep. Surf beach and wave pools, not really a great idea for non-swimmers. Really, we're looking more still water beaches if you are going to have non-swimmers. And there are instances maybe that you're going to an off-site facility and some pools may be too deep even for your shortest non-swimmer. So it just wouldn't be an ideal situation for your non-swimmers. And when we talk about designated areas, these are a few ways that you can go about setting up those areas. So a float line can be used. We've seen float lines in pools. They're pretty standard, pretty common. Also, for those going to beaches, they will oftentimes lay out a float line in an area designated for their camp, as specifically one that would be shallow, no greater than chest deep for your non-swimmers. You can also use staff positioning. So you can have staff in the water where that water, where either there's the slope in the water, those divots, like I said, in a natural body of water. So you can have the staff there, preventing the non-swimmers from going into too deep of water. Just using completely separate pools is another option, having a pool that the entire pool is no greater than chest deep, or docks potentially being some form of barrier to have those designated swim areas. Along with that, we also want to have a visual identifier for our swimmers versus our non-swimmers. So we want to make sure that when we're looking in the pool, the beach, the swim area, we can quickly identify who is a swimmer and who is a non-swimmer. There are, again, some exceptions to this. So if there is a physical barrier, so we talked about the different swim areas, that is more for keeping the swimmers, the non-swimmers out of the swim area. But when you're talking about a visual identifier, you wouldn't need one if there is a physical barrier like a swim crib or a dock to completely prevent the swimmer or the non-swimmer from going into a swim area. So something where a non-swimmer would have to essentially climb out of the swim area and then go into a new swim area. At that point, you wouldn't need a visual identifier because you know all of the campers or bathers in this one completely physically locked off area are our non-swimmers, and over here are our swimmers. And same with a separate pool. So you have a pool that is only non-swimmers, you would not need any visual identifiers because you have one pool for the non-swimmers, one pool for the swimmers. Now, aside from those exceptions, we do need those visual identifiers. So some common ones are wristbands, bathing caps, zinc oxide, t-shirts, and this is all again addressed in your safety plan. You can identify what identifier you are going to use. And you want to make sure that you're identifying your swimmers at a minimum. You don't want to identify or have the wristbands just for your non-swimmers because it can be something that could be easily taken off. So at a minimum, you want your swimmers to be identified by some sort of wristband, bathing cap, some sort of visual identifier, or both your swimmers and your non-swimmers. So you can have maybe a green wristband for your swimmers, a red for your non-swimmers, or any sort of combination that you choose. And it may need to be switched up if you are going camp trip swimming. One example is state parks don't allow t-shirts to be worn. So depending on where you're going, where your trip is, you may need to adjust your visual identifiers for your swimmers. Next, we're just going to get into the buddy system, buddy boards. So you want to make sure that anytime you're swimming, regardless of free swim, instructional swim, you want to make sure that all bathers are paired with a buddy. They should be the same swimming ability, ideally, but if they're not, if you do, for whatever reason, have to pair a swimmer with a non-swimmer, they must remain in the non-swimmer area. So that swimmer would not be able to go off into the swim area. They would need to be in the non-swimmer area. And you want to have a minimum or a maximum of 1 threesome in a swim area. So if you have a swimming area and a non-swimming area, you could have 1 threesome in each of those areas, but that's it, no more than that. And ideally, you would do your best to avoid those threesomes. You could always pair a camper with a counselor if you want to make sure that you only have pairs instead of 1 triplet, but you are allowed at least that 1 triplet. And we just want to reiterate, just the buddy system is, it's just a great preventative tool from preventing any sort of drowning occurrences. So we did talk about, we have our lifeguards, obviously, regarding the pool. We have our counselors who are supervising the campers, but then each camper has a buddy to be that 3rd line of defense there. Well, they're really the 1st line of defense. If a camper is having trouble swimming, if they're losing buoyancy, if they start to go under the water, their buddy is going to be the first one to react, to go and tell a counselor, tell a lifeguard, get some sort of attention to their buddy to help them and avoid any sort of drowning incidents. You want to make sure that all the buddies are instructed to notify lifeguards or counselors when their partner is in distress, like I just stated, and they should always stay with their buddy. Like I said, they are that 1st line of defense. So you want to make sure that they are staying as close as they can, so that if there is some sort of trouble that one of the campers or the swimmers is having, their buddy's right there to alert the lifeguards and or counselors. Some different situations that you may get into. One is just aquatic amusement parks, specifically the water slides. So when you are going to be in situations that are a little bit different than a standard pool, when you have your buddies together the entire time, this would be something that we'd want to see for these water slides. So you'd have a counselor positioned at the beginning and end of the slide, so the top and bottom. Campers should stay in pairs while they're online. The one buddy goes down, waits for the second buddy goes down, they reconvene, and then they exit with the counselor together. And the campers should move as a group to the next attraction. And just one other thing with this, if you are going to any sort of aquatic amusement park, Splish Splash, you want to make sure that Lazy Rivers or similar rides like that, the buddies are staying as close as possible on those sorts of rides or attractions. As far as the board system goes, so we want to make sure that you have some system in place for accounting for the bathers and their buddies. It can be a stationary board if you have an on-site swim, a large board that can be in the pool, or a large board that can be in the pool enclosure, or handheld clipboards per counselor or group, camp group. And the system at a minimum has to have the full name of the camper, their swimming ability, and then the area of the pool that they, or the separate pool that they're assigned to. It should also clearly indicate what the buddy pairings are, as well as our triplets. So it should also have a method of recording the entry and exit from the pool or beach. So we want to know when they're in the water, when they're out of the water, or if they're just not, or if they're not in the pool enclosure. And we want to make sure that we're tracking when they are leaving the enclosure. So if they need to go to the bathroom, we have something in place where we can monitor when they're leaving the pool. So we can either reassign their buddy, bring their buddy with them, just making sure that we're accounting for everybody that's in the water at all times. This is just one example of a board. So this is a board that would be in place. This obviously wouldn't be good for camp trips, but if you have a pool enclosure, this would be an option to have everyone identified. So we have color-coded tags, and you can see we have these yellow tags would be for our non-swimmers. These green tags over here would be for our swimmers. And then it would have the non-swimmer area, or this could have the name of the pool that they're in, the name of the set or the area of the pool that they're in. Same with over here. And now you can see right here, we discussed having a swimmer paired with a non-swimmer. They are now in their non-swimmer area because again, the swimmer can't be in the swim area if they're paired with a non-swimmer. And then just a little sample of the tag, we have the full name of the camper, listed that they're a non-swimmer, and the area of the pool that they're in. You also want to make sure that you have a means for accounting for who's not there. So we have cabin 1. So these 2 campers are either not present or they're just not in the pool enclosure. Well, this is for a beach, I should say. So they're not on the beach right now. These campers down here are not in the water right now. They're on the beach. And then we have 1 camper who's in the restroom. So really accounting for where everybody is during our swim session. And then it also has a nice little pre-established area for the triplets. So you can do a quick visual identifier. We have 1 triplet here and no more triplets. So you have sort of a separate section only for those triplets. And when you do have staff in the water, it is a good idea to have them incorporated into this board as well. And I didn't touch on this earlier. You want to make sure when you're doing your swim assessments, it's not required, but it is a really good idea to have your staff assessed as well to differentiate between any swimmers or non-swimmers. And maybe repeating myself a little bit here, but it should be used during all swim activities. During instructional swim, the buddies don't necessarily have to be right next to each other because again, they're going to be taken by the instructor potentially, but you do want to still have that accounting system and have everyone paired off or that 1 triplet during your instructional activities as well as your free swim. If you have campers that aren't quite able to understand the buddy system, you may want to develop a different sort of system that they can understand. So there are alternatives that you can go towards. It's really the state has their one recommendation for the buddy board system, but we are open. If you have a different system, you are welcome to use it so long as it's put in your safety plan and approved in advance. When you have multiple pools in 1 enclosure, you can use that large board and you can just have the different pools. You can use a clipboard, which I'm going to get to shortly. And then it's a good idea to include our non-campers in the buddy board system. Like I said, our staff as well. So it doesn't need to account for the entire camp. So it's a good idea for each group to have really their own board or at least have their own tags. So in the situation where it showed that large board, each group would have their own tags that they would hang on to. But especially when you're going off-site, you're going on a camp trip, such as an aquatic theme park, you're doing a splish splash, each group would then be responsible for their own buddy board. It wouldn't be like the camp director needs to maintain everything or the aquatics director. Each group should be responsible for their campers and for their buddies and for their tags and their board. And good ones for these trips are going to be clipboards, pocket charts, which I'm going to get to in a minute. And when you do have your campers mixed with public, it is acceptable for them to be in the same pool as the public, the same swim area, but it's a good idea to try and keep them as separate as possible just to make it easier for your counselors to supervise them. We want to make sure that everyone's easy to identify. So when they are in a public pool mixed with the public, we want to do our best to sort of keep them together the best as you can. And like I said before about having sort of different situations for camp trips, if normally you only have your non-swimmer or if normally you only have your swimmers with a visual identifier, a camp trip is a great time to make sure that all of your campers have some sort of visual identifier. So if they are mixed with the public, you can quickly pick out who are your campers versus who is part of the public. Now to get to a couple examples. So this is one example on a clipboard, just a sort of folding like a folder on a clipboard here. We have the different groups. So we have the sharks, the sailfish. So we have different groups. We have our buddies. An I here, so they're using a little bit of a different terminology. So like an I would be an intermediate swimmer, a D would be a deep water swimmer. So we have our different groups here. Situation like this 2 system isn't ideal if you're going to use triplets. It gets a little bit messy, but again, it is an option that you can use where you're having your the full name, the swim ability, and then the 2 buddies next to one another. And then we have a section for not being in the pool area or being on the pool deck, not in the pool, and those campers that are absent. This would be another one, sort of a portable option. You can see here it sort of folds up. It can be good for a camp trip where it unfolds. And we can have it's a little hard to see here, but we have our non-swimmers, our swimmer. This is really more of a generalized example. It doesn't have the proper tagging with the full name, but just an option like the little card slots here to have all of our buddies together, and something that folds up neatly for when you go on a camp trip. But one that we really recommend is this clipboard style. So along the top here, we have main pool. So it says what pool it's for. We have our different color-coded clothespins here. And you can see these ones that are nice and close together. These are going to be our pairs. So we have our buddy pair here that are in the water, our buddy pair here that are in the water. Swimmers, we have our pair right here as our non-swimmers, our non-swimming area. We have these two who are out of the pool. And then again, you can have a separate area for counselors. So this is it's pretty easy and quick to use. You can quickly move around the buddies if you need to. You can quickly move them out of the water if needed. You can rearrange them quickly. You could use this as an activity too when camp first starts. Every camper can decorate their clothespin if they want to, add their name. Again, the color coding or the swim level will have to be done by you, but just something that you can do. This is great for trips and even not trips. It's great. Each counselor or group can have their own clipboard for all of their campers for when they're doing any sort of swim activity. Now, along with the buddy boards, you want to make sure that you're conducting your buddy checks. They have to be at a minimum every 15 minutes. So at least every 15 minutes, can be done more frequently, but that is just our minimum. And they must be used along with the buddy boards. So you don't want it to be attendance. You don't want to count off 1, 2, 3, 4. It shouldn't be counting the campers. It should be accounting for each pair. So you're going along and you're checking against that board. You're making sure that you have each of your pairs. And we want to take no more than 60 seconds. So it should be about a minute per buddy check. And the campers do not need to leave the water for these buddy checks. And actually, sometimes that can take more time to get them out of the water. So they can remain in the water. You can have them just go to the side of the pool if you want. They can stay where they are, but they should stop swimming. Have all of the buddies accounted for. Once everyone's accounted for, you can resume swimming. When you're going on a camp trip, you still have to conduct your buddy checks, but you do want to make sure that you're not interfering with any of the lifeguards there. So if normally when you're on site, you're using a whistle to conduct a buddy check, if you're at a public pool, the lifeguards there may not like you blowing a whistle. It may add to some confusion. So you may want to just talk to them in advance, let them know that you're going to be there, you're going to be conducting buddy checks. You can use flags, hand signals, or if the facility is agreeable, you could always ask them to conduct buddy checks when needed. But they wouldn't be the ones, counting, not counting, shouldn't use the term counting, but they wouldn't be the ones accounting for the buddy pairs. They would just be the ones to initiate the buddy check. And then your counselors, aquatics director would be the ones to then make sure that all the buddies are accounted for. And if you do have multiple camps using the same offsite facility, may be a good idea to work in conjunction with them so you're not adding any more confusion. They're 5 minutes behind you, they're conducting a buddy check, then you're conducting a buddy check. Maybe a good idea just to try and coordinate if you have a facility where there are going to be multiple camps using it at the same time. I'm just going to get into what we see most when we're documenting violations during our operational inspections and we are viewing a swim. So we're having campers that aren't reassigned to a buddy when one gets out of the water. So we have a camper that runs to the bathroom. Maybe the buddy doesn't tell their counselor, but either way, we want to make sure that that camper's buddy is being reassigned. Either you're making your one triplet at that point, or you're pairing him with a counselor until his or her buddy get back. Not being listed, you want to make sure that all of your campers are listed on that buddy board that you have. You want to make sure their swimmability is listed. So that's another thing that we're not seeing. We're not seeing the swimmability on the tags or the clothespins on the buddy board. We have a swimmer and a non-swimmer paired together, but then we have the swimmer in the swim area and the non-swimmer in the non-swimmer area. So we want to make sure when we do have those pairings, they're always in the non-swimmer area. And want to make sure that the accounting system matches the buddies that are called during the buddy check. So when we go out to camp, a buddy check is called and you have Tim and Joe are paired together, but then when they get to the side of the pool, now Tim is with Sally. So we want to make sure that the buddies know where their buddy are, the campers know where their buddies are, and it is matching what is on the board. And just a quick overview of the public health hazards when it comes to swimming and buddy boards at camp. So just not having a buddy system in place. So not a failure to establish the buddy system. So if you just don't have a buddy system, that is a public health hazard, or just not enforcing it. That would also be a public health hazard at the operational inspection. Not restricting the non-swimmers to water less than chest deep, except for those exceptions that we said before, the Learn to Swim programs, or when you have the counselors in the water specifically for those non-swimmers. So these would be public health hazards during your camp inspection, as well as just not implementing the camp safety plan, resulting in a child not being protected from any unreasonable risk. So if your safety plan, has one way of conducting the buddy check, but you're doing it in a safe manner, wouldn't necessarily be a public health hazard. But if there is some form of unreasonable risk that we see where you're just completely not following the safety plan, or you don't have any visual identifiers now laid out in your safety plan, that would be a potential public health hazard at camp. And speaking of the safety plan, it's really an operational and risk management manual. So it is there for you to make sure that you're avoiding all of those unreasonable risks. It's organized and planned effort of staff to prevent the loss of money, assets, or human value due to events or circumstances that can be controlled. And we do have a link here for the safety plan templates. So you can go to follow this link. We do have the safety plan templates there for not only the bulk template, but for our on-site swim, our camp trip swimming template, and any other templates that you may need. And again, the purpose is, it's in the name, is safety of the campers and the staff. So it's a system to identify, evaluate, reduce, prevent, or control loss, whether that's injury, illness, or death. And you want to make sure that you have consistency from year to year. So the safety plan is not something that needs to be renewed or reviewed, redone every year. It should be something that can go year to year, that your staff can use to understand your procedures and policies for your camp operation. And like I said, we have the link here, so you can follow this link. We can post it in the chat here, and we will be forwarding the slides to everybody. So you can go there and find the safety plan templates for camp trimming, camp trip swimming, as well as on-site swimming. And just the biggest takeaway is really, in summary, buddy system is a requirement. It must be in place, or have it in place in a way that works for your camp. So it is flexible, but as long as it's being addressed in that safety plan, and that's pretty much it. And any changes to it need to be made in advance before they're implemented. So you want to notify us of any changes and have that approved before you go ahead and implement those changes. And that is going to be it. Thank you all so much for coming. We are going to open up to some questions now. So if anyone has any questions for swimming, or really any other questions for our presentation here.
I'm Marilyn Byron. I'm with Park Shore Day Camp. I'm their medical director over there. And of course, I'm a little disappointed we're not getting information on COVID, because that's why I'm sitting here.
Yeah.
But anyway, when you address the COVID guidelines, I just have a couple of questions, whether you will be addressing some of the concerns I have regarding COVID this year in the camp, if I may ask. Will you be addressing testing, whether we are permitted, we're purchasing testing kits? Will we be permitted to either recommend a camper be tested? We also have travel kids. We would like to send tests with our travel camp, so that if we do believe there might be a COVID situation, we could easily test them, of course, with the permission. In that case, if we send out to our parents like a written medical consent form for COVID testing, we could assist a child in testing them when they're away, or even sending home test kits like we do in school. We do it all the time. So those are some of my concerns with COVID testing. Would that be addressed in your up and coming guidelines?
We're hoping so. I mean, Jeff might be able to help clear up, but we're waiting on the state, sadly. It's not, the guidelines aren't going to be coming down from the county, so we're waiting on clarification from the state, but I will make note of those concerns that you have. We can forward it up, and hopefully it will be addressed in that guidance. But if it isn't, we can forward it up to our state reps, and we can get back to you, and we can notify all those involved when we do get information on that, and let you know when we get an answer to that.
Okay, so would it include written written consent from a parent to be able to test their child if they're away, or written medical consent to test a child either at camp or sending home a test kit, and either suggesting they go to a pediatrician or requiring them to get tested?
Just write it down, and we will, yeah, we'll reach out, and hopefully we can get an answer for you.
Thank you.
Hi, I have just a quick question before we get going about the buddy check system.
Yep.
So, is it one triplet per pool or is it one triplet per group?
So it's per area, swim area.
So when it's roped off, that's, okay,
Correct,
just wanted
exactly, yeah. So if you have a float line, each section of the float line would be a different swim area. So you'd only be allowed to have one triplet in area. And now if it's an area where you have maybe swimmers versus non-swimmers, so you have that triplet who are swimmers are trying to get into the non-swimmer area, you really wouldn't want that. You'd want to have them stay in that one area. So it's not per pool. It would be
That's
per
perfect, because
swim
that's what we
area.
have already, so that's perfect. I just want to make sure we understood that. Okay, thank you so much and have a great afternoon. I'm going to put myself on mute.
Great, thank you. And we do have a question in the chat here. If you have a division of special needs campers, can you handle the buddy check for the pool differently than the other camp groups? Absolutely. It would just need to be addressed in your safety plan. So you wouldn't want to implement anything like that before you reach out to your camp inspector or address it in the safety plan. But you can absolutely have a sort of a different system in place for those campers that may not be able to understand the standard procedures that you have in place. But yeah, absolutely.
So I'm sorry, that was my question. So would you indicate it as, it's Melissa from Island Class.
How's
So
it
would you
going?
indicate it, would you just indicate it as when this division swims by their period, or in the plan, like when I run period 1? Or would you indicate it by the name of that division? Because it's a self-contained group, meaning within the camp, we have a group of special needs kids that are supported in 1-to-3 ratio.
Yep.
But could we say, we have everybody get out of the pool for a couple of reasons, but that group doesn't swim in an area where checking in the pool makes sense. Do you get what I'm saying? Because the way where the zones of where they
Yep.
swim are different. So we actually prefer to leave them in. Last year we had them come out, but their mobility issues, they were slower because of their mobility issues also.
Sure.
So how do I indicate in the plan that
In
the
the,
best way, I guess?
in the buddy check system, there is an other option. So what I would recommend is checking that other option, but then just making a note. So it's pretty clear that this procedure to be used for our developmentally disabled or special needs campers, and then just indicating what that procedure would be. So we see that because sometimes if you're checking agree with the above and then agree with the other, it gets confusing. But if you just write in there this procedure to be conducted for, or if you have, like you said, you have a specific name for that group, just indicating this group, we're going to be using this procedure. The above procedure will be used for all other campers. Something like that would be
Got
fine.
it, but don't check both boxes.
You can, in that instance, you can, because then you're clarifying. Yeah, as long as you
Okay.
put some sort of written clarification of what procedure is going to be for what campers, that would be fine to have both. Yep.
Okay, thank you.
Anybody else? All right, well, if we don't have any other questions, thank you again all for coming. We do appreciate it. We will send out a follow-up email to this. It will have we'll provide the slides, a link to the recording. Once we get that all set, we will, some questions here, we will send out the pesticide information again, just so everybody has it. And we will look into information a little bit more about those COVID questions. that you had, and hopefully we'll get an answer for everybody.